Hey everybody, I'm back with another episode of Radio KBE. Last time I think we spoke, we were right over 250 subscribers and we are now over 300 subscribers, which is awesome. So thank you to everybody who's liked and subscribed the channel and been sharing it on Twitter. That's really the only place I share it. Also, the newsletter also broke 300 subscribers, which is pretty awesome. So I'm guessing the written companion stuff is really resonating with you guys. I just appreciate all the support. So if you can like and subscribe, it helps the channel out a lot. And it's just, again, I read the comments, everything. So I hope, if nothing else, this stuff is informative. It's entertaining to some degree. And if nothing else, it just gives some different commentary about the Lakers and just kind of this team and stuff like that. So I appreciate all the support as always. I apologize for not having a video up for the past couple days. I've been sort of demolished. My health has been a little wrecked by COVID. The little one got it and then she gave it to me. And then I was, as you can hear in the sound of my voice, it was not so good. And I'm still sort of recovering, but my coughing fits have gone down significantly and stuff like that. So I thought I felt good enough to talk for 30 minutes about the Lakers and let you guys hear my voice again. So as always, I appreciate you guys tuning in. For this episode, I wanted to talk about a position similar to the way like I talked about like the high motor big for this team and running in Dardenham's offense. The thing I wanted to talk about today was what I like to call the high Q shooter. I shortened high IQ to high Q just because it's easier to say. But the guy that I put in the feature image was Austin Reaves. And one of the things that I think that this team really needs, in addition to just 3-and-D wings, is, obviously you want shooters to be able to, the most important thing is that they make their shots when they have those opportunities. But there's a big difference between players who catch the ball and just shoot it and players who catch the ball, process sort of the reads, like what is it that the opposing defense is about to do? Are they going to close out hard to me, or are they late on the closeout? Is there a better opportunity available? Like the Lakers need a guy in the starting lineup where if they get the ball in that situation, they're processing reads really well. And when we think about the three guys last season that in Vogel's system at least, that functioned in the two guard spot, it was Avery Bradley, Malik Monk, and Austin Reaves. Austin didn't have the scoring talent that Malik did, and he didn't have, I would say Avery's defensive talent sort of fell off, but he wasn't necessarily the most technical defender that Avery Bradley was. But Austin processed his reads when it came to catching the ball in closeouts. His IQ was really high, and even though like on the defensive end, teams would pick on him because of his physical, he's a rookie, so he's still learning, getting used to the game speed of the NBA and stuff like that, and he has to hit NBA sort of strength. He had to get his strength and conditioning up, which is, I think he'll play better in the second year. Like, you could see the potential with Austin, and you could see how good he was going to be. And so the reason I put him in the feature image is because Austin is a nice blueprint, or a nice moldable player. Like, he's a moldable. You look at him and you say, okay, there are things that he can do that if we can get him to be at this level of athleticism or this level of strength, he can be even better. Or if he gets this amount of conditioning, he can be even better. And in an ideal world, I think Austin Reaves would be the guy who would be the high Q2 that's next to the Lakers. He's basically a guy who's more or less like a converted point guard to now shooting guard in the NBA, but he has point guard skills and makes point guard reads, which is why he processes his closeout reads so well. Like, you put him next to a guy like Russ, like Austin knows, do I need to be am I staying at the level of the ball when Russ is driving? Am I getting to the corner? Am I staying above the wings? When I run the floor, like, am I running the right lanes? That sort of stuff. So that sort of stuff matters. And so Austin's like very productive. He's a great example of somebody who should be in that position. But if we want to go beyond that, and if we sort of take a look at just kind of what's going on with our current roster and the players that we have on the roster, we have Russ, we have Austin. We don't know if we're going to bring back Malik or not. I know a lot of Laker fans want to, but we'll have to see what it costs to bring him back. Malik may potentially be back, and then we have Talon, and then we have Kendrick Nunn. Now, that's basically Austin 6'5", and then, we don't know if we're going to bring back Avery Bradley. I would imagine that we're not going to, but we may. That's about 5 or 6 guards, depending on what happens, like with Malik and Avery Bradley, that we could potentially sit in that position. Regardless, this is assuming Russ is on the roster. I don't know if he'll get traded. Ideally, you want to trade. The best trade chip the Lakers have is to trade Russ to a team that has, a guy like Malcolm Brogdon, assuming he can stay healthy, a guy like Buddy Hield, if he can stay healthy, and bringing back guys like that. But, for whatever reason, Darvin Ham has spoken pretty highly about Russ. We still can't trade Russ until he actually opts in and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see just kind of what happens in this situation and whatnot. But it's getting that type of shooter in the starting lineup, especially next to LeBron, it makes a big deal. And one of the things I think it's sort of less talked about is these sort of like high Q shooters. Not only do they understand where they need to be to make the most of their catch and shoot opportunities, but they're players who, because they understand what their strengths are, because they process reads really well, they can transition from being a catch and shoot player for 5 to 6 possessions in a row and immediately go into running in a traditional set me a pin down screen. I'm going to come off the screen and curl, or I'm going to pop out for a 3, like the Klay Thompson style plays, that sort of thing. And one of the things that we see with the Bucks is that when Giannis goes to sit and the feature sort of becomes Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton, that's what Chris Middleton does. Like the Bucks are able to go from running a sort of Giannis-centric, attack the rim, put pressure on the rim sort of offense, and they're able to go from that to sort of a more methodical, let Chris Middleton get his shots off and stuff like that in the mid-range or at the rim or from 3 through different screens, pick and roll, pin down screens, that sort of stuff, flare screens, whatever. Like that's only possible with a high Q shooter, like a high Q2. Like that's the only way that happens. You can't do it necessarily with a guy like Avery Bradley because he doesn't have the scoring prowess, right? That to be able to do that. And then you also can't necessarily do that with Malik because Malik doesn't process reads exactly the same way. He's closer to Austin Reeves because of his scoring ability, but sometimes Malik settles for the home run. Like he'll take the 3 instead of taking the mid-range shot, or he'll go all the way to the rim and throw the lob when maybe that lob may not necessarily be there. Malik is probably, and this is not a knock on Malik. I think Malik, if you took his role and you told him, Malik, I'm going to give you 25 minutes to 30 minutes a game, and in those 25 to 30 minutes, I want you to score as much as you possibly can when your number gets called, when we run plays for you, I think that's the best way to use Malik. But a guy like Austin can play in every single situation. So the Lakers, ideally, I think, want to try and find a guy like that. And the fact that we have so many different, and the fact that we have so many undersized guards makes me think to some degree that the Lakers should try and target somebody like that. So who are the types of players that the Lakers could potentially target that sort of fit that criteria, right? These are guys that can transition from being again, the main quality I wanted, and obviously the defense stuff matters. So I don't get me confused. The defense is really important, but I think if in Darvin Ham's offense or in Darvin Ham's philosophy, I think if LeBron and AD go back to moving to the 4 and the 5, I think they'll be okay. Defensively, I think the Lakers will have more size if they use a floor spacing 5, as opposed to trying to add a wing and stuff like that. I think that's the direction he's going to go in. So what you're looking for here is you're looking for guys who can seamlessly transition from having to be a catch and shoot player for multiple possessions into becoming a player who can actively have the ball in his hands, use screens to get himself decent looks from the mid-range. Doesn't have to be a high-volume rim attacker, okay? It's somebody who's lives sort of in that long to paint, like the soft floater area, that sort of area. So it doesn't have to be a high-volume rim attacker. Just somebody who can more or less be a very pure jump shooter when his number is called and when his sets are called. So like that's where we want to like look around, and the ball handling has to be like decent. Like you have to be able to navigate a screen. Like it can't be with a live dribble. It can't just be somebody who's going to give it up very quickly. A guy like KCP was a good example of somebody who would do that at times. Like it's not that KCP was incapable. Like he was apprehensive to dribble the ball at times because of his own ability, and that's okay. That happens, but we want the guy who's not afraid to do that, who can keep a live dribble as they're navigating through maybe crowded spaces, or just knows how to get to their pull-up jumper to some degree. So when we take a look at players around the league, there's not that many players. There's almost nobody available in free agency first and foremost that you're going to get at the MLE or the BAE for that amount. And we need it to be more than just a catch and shoot player. So chances are we're probably going to have to trade. If it's not the Russ trade, we may actually end up trading, I would guess. It's possible that they trade Talon and Kendrick Nunn together. And if they trade Talon and Kendrick Nunn together, they can bring back like up to $19 million. So if we're looking for a high Q2, right? If we're looking for a guy that can fit the role, the catch and shoot to a traditional 2 role, a traditional 2 offense, the same way that maybe a guy like Chris Middleton does, the ancillary effect of that player is that he now allows, if you insert him into the starting lineup, he now can function as like a play finisher, right? So when the Lakers go from starting Russ, the high Q2, LeBron, and AD, well, the high Q2 and the 5 will probably end up being like these 3-and-D type of role guys until one of Russ and LeBron sits. And when one of Russ and LeBron sits, that high Q2 ends up being the person who's featured more with Anthony Davis. So that it's not just Anthony Davis isolation sets, or it's not just, anything that's very predictable and easier for the defense to play against. So when you think of players like that, you think of players, and I'll pull the what's it called up here. We know the parameters if they're going to do it via trade will be, probably Talon and Nunn, because they'll want their opportunities to play too as well. And again, this is all assuming that we keep Russ. So you're looking around the league at guys who make around $19 million or less, and might be on a contract that is a little bit more long term that team may want to get out of, that fits a little bit more closely into the Lakers timeline. Ideally, you want this player to have size, because let's say we bring back Malik Monk, right? He's undersized. Russ is technically undersized, even though he has a higher strength profile. Austin Reeves is taller, but his strength profile is lower. So, like, depending on what his strength profile looks like, your backcourt looks a little shaky. So you want to try and find a player that ideally has size. So you're looking for 6'5", 6'6", 6'7". You don't want to go into 6'8", 6'9". That's like Paul George territory. Like those players will get checked by smaller players, which will make it hard for those guys to navigate. Then they got to start posting up, and that's not the offense that we want to run. So you're looking for guys that are around 6'5", 6'6", 6'7". That's a good size that you have. That's a guy that can, at that height, can still navigate screens when they're defending their player, and still has enough size to use screens themselves and get their shot off, right? And so when we look around the league and we look for players that may potentially fit into that, right, that $19 million sort of category, assuming, again, this is also assuming that there's trade value to Talon and Kendrick Nunn's expiring and stuff like that, which I think there is. That you just have to see if you can find somebody. And so there are 2 names in particular that sort of pop out for me that I think would be great candidates for that specific high Q2 role. The first guy is Bogdanovic. Bogdan. Again, I don't know if I'll butcher his name or not. But Bogdanovic over in Atlanta. If you guys remember, Bogdanovic was originally the guy that was had a restricted free agent, I think, sheet that was supposed to be signed by the Bucks when he was with the Kings. And this was before. And what ended up happening is that like it came out that it was, he was negotiating during a period of time that he was not allowed to negotiate in. Therefore, when it got announced that he had signed the sheet or something, it was a whole thing where basically he did something that he wasn't allowed to do. The Bucks ended up getting penalized for it, and then I think Bogdanovic ended up going to Atlanta. He ended up signing with Atlanta. But the point I wanted to bring up is that the Bucks originally wanted him. When the Bucks weren't able to get him, they ended up getting Drew. They ended up winning a championship anyways. But you can see how that high Q2, and remember, they ended up trading Eric Bledsoe for Drew Holiday when they made that trade originally. But I would assume that in theory, they would have played Eric Bledsoe and Bogdanovic together next to Chris Middleton at the 3, Giannis at the 4, Brook Lopez at the 5. And so I don't know if that team wins a championship, but they ended up making a trade for Drew and they ended up winning a championship. So good for the Bucks. So there's some alignment there in terms of just what they may have tried to do with Bogdanovic's role. And Bogdanovic, the reason why his name is interesting is because the Hawks just paid Kevin Huerter. He's 6'7", and if I'm not mistaken, Bogdanovic is 6. Bogdanovic himself is 6'6", if I'm not mistaken. And so, like, he fits, from a what's it called standpoint, like he absolutely fits into like that specific role that I'm sort of describing, like this high Q2 guy where, in the Atlanta offense, when Trae Young is running, just spamming his pick and roll constantly over and over again, Bogdanovic functions as a catch and shoot guy. And then when there are times where Trae is seeing just heavy coverage or something like that, what he ends up doing is, like they end up deferring to Bogdanovic. And if you guys remember, in that Philly upset series, 2 playoff series ago, like they went to Kevin Huerter. And that was because Bogdanovic had knee injury. So one of the issues that's been going on with Bogdanovic is he hasn't played as many games, ideally, because of his knee issues. So they've been bringing him off the bench. And I think he got knocked out of the Miami series, if I'm not mistaken, because of his knee issues, the recurring knee issue. And so there is a little bit of a health concern when it comes to him. But again, 6'6", probably slots in perfectly next to LeBron and AD, and Russ, if Russ is still on this roster. He can seamlessly transition from that role. Like, he's historically come off the bench and played roles where he's been like the bench scoring guy. So if the Lakers bring back, my thing is, if the Lakers bring back Malik and they have Austin already, they may feel inclined to keep Malik and Austin playing together because they have a natural synergy with each other, where they play really well. That allows a guy like Bogdanovic, maybe he stays more healthy because he's playing next to superstars that won't he won't have to do as much of the heavy lifting. He can just focus on defense and hitting his open shots. So he's actually somebody I really, really like in this position. I don't know what it would take to get him. I don't know if Atlanta would consider trading him, but he's scheduled to make $18 million this year. Fits right into that amount. He's also got a player option for $18 million next year. I don't know if Atlanta sees him as part of their long-term future. Again, they're paying Kevin Huerter that same money. They still have John Collins. They're going to, they're running into a logjam of players. That DeAndre Hunter's on that team. He's going to want to get paid. They traded away Cam Reddish. Like, it's, if they're giving away talent or if they're trading away talent just for picks, a guy like Cam Reddish, who was a 10th overall pick or something like that, like a high lottery pick, there may be an opportunity for the Lakers to offer salary savings or something like that for a team like Atlanta to see, just kind of where they're at when it comes to it. So the other team, or the other name that you guys see that sort of fits right into this role, into this number here, is Evan Fournier. He was rumored to be sort of, a lot of Laker fans were talking about, like, if the Lakers ended up trading Russ and they traded him to a team like the Knicks, if the Knicks really wanted a point guard, because they not want a point guard. I don't know if they do or they don't. And Fournier is a name that could fit in. Again, Fournier, same exact type of player. Like he's a guy who's historically functioned as a catch and shoot player to some degree, and then also has, like if you watch Knicks games, he'll have games where he starts out the game hitting like going 4 for 6 from 3, like on his first like 7 shots, and then they'll start kind of using him differently, and they'll use him in down screens and stuff like that. He's another player that I think the Lakers, he's on a longer term contract. If we look at him, 18 million, almost the same, he's exact same as Bogdanovic. The only difference is he's got 19 million the following year. That's guaranteed. It's not a player option. And then there's a club option on for 19 million. I don't know if the Lakers would target somebody like him, but again, let's see what his height turns out to be like. So if his height matches up, I think I spelled his name wrong. Oh, sorry. Let's see what his height is. All right, so 6'6". So again, another guy that's, you've got good size there. So now you've got Evan Fournier, you've got Bogdanovic. Both, they sort of cross that 6'6". They hit right on that 6'6" height. They can transition from that catch and shoot role to having to run those down screens and stuff like that. Again, those are the type of players that you want, because having that flexibility, both as a finisher and as a we're going to run plays for you sort of player, like that's a big deal. That's what makes teams successful. If you think about the playoffs that have gone on, it's what Boston is doing with a guy like Derek White. Like they bring Derek White off the bench, and he doesn't necessarily function in just like this point guard role. Like with the Spurs, he played point guard, 2 guards sometimes at times. Like when he comes out on the floor and he gets the ball in his hands, he processes reads. He has to decide, am I going to attack the rim? Is the play call for that? Is that what the design of the action is supposed to be, or the goal of, whatever the coach has told him to do? Or does he take the open 3? It's somebody who can transition seamlessly between those things. There is a lot of value. That is the meaning of high Q2. Somebody who understands how you have to transition between those 2 specific roles. Pardon me. And guys like Bogdanovic, guys like Evan Fournier, you're seeing it with Derek White. Those are guys that understand that very clearly. Klay Thompson understands that very clearly. Jordan Poole is young, but he's like gradually figuring that stuff out. What makes him good is he's able to process his reads quickly. Am I supposed to attack the rim? Am I taking the 3? One of the things that he struggled with is taking the mid-range shot, but I imagine if he figures that part out, he'll fall basically into this category of this type of player that they can have. So those are 2 names that I think would be interesting, that would be available. That right there, like Derek White. I didn't even realize that he was on that list, but that's a perfect example. Another name that you've probably seen another name that's on this list that you watch in the playoffs process reads this way, a guy like Spencer Dinwiddie. Like as soon as he came on the floor, it was one of the things with the Jazz series. How quickly does he process? Do I attack the rim? Do I take the 3? That sort of thing. I think Spencer Dinwiddie's 6'5" himself. Was rumored to be point guard for the Lakers a few years back, potentially before the Russ trade. These are the kinds of guys that you're looking to get. This is what it costs to get those kind of guys. These are not just catch and shoot 3-and-D guys. These are guys that you can give the ball to them or ask them to do more than just catch and shoot 3s. And I would say Dinwiddie's not even a traditional catch and shoot 3 guy, and they can do more with it, right? You see another guy on this list, Gary Trent Jr. If you watch how he plays with the Raptors, he functions in both roles. There are times where he just runs his lanes, runs to the corners, makes himself available for open 3s, and then there are times where they run actual sets for him to get looks. And those are the kinds of guys that the Lakers have to try and target. I think that's the kind of guy the Lakers, if they can find somebody that fits that sort of quality, that fits that criteria, it'll go a long way. I think it'll help resolve some of the concerns that we've had about shooting, because that player is going to play 30 to 35 minutes anyways. So whoever the high Q2 is that you get, that player is going to play 30 to 35 minutes. And as long as they can defend their position with some level of competency within Ham's scheme, I think the Lakers will be okay. And when you have a guy that can play 30 to 35 minutes in that role, transitioning from catching and shooting to being like a come off the screens or run pick and roll player, That goes a long way to preserving a guy like LeBron's legs. Takes the scoring pressure off of a guy like Anthony Davis if he has too many bodies that are attacking him, and makes use of a guy like Russ, if Russ is on this roster, when he attacks the rim and he needs an escape pass because there's an extra big that's on him and stuff like that. The threat of the offense increases significantly. And so I think this is something that the Lakers have to try and add. I don't know if it's just one player or if it's two players. But I don't think this is not your traditional 3-and-D player. And I think this is something that is important to the Lakers. They have to get at least one guy that can do that. We have a guy that can process reads really well already. That's Austin Reeves in that role. But I think it may make more sense to have him come off the bench just because especially if we keep Malik, because that tandem just works really, really well. And, obviously if somebody gets hurt, he can sit in that position too as well. But that's sort of the way I look at this role. And like the high motor big, whether it's the heavy or the mobile 5, this role is important. We always say that the stars are the most important part, and they are. But you've seen that in the playoffs, teams will do stuff to take away like entire parts of the court. You'll see a team like the Celtics, even though it has huge amounts of switchability, they will still run two bigs because they don't want to allow Draymond Green to use any short roll action to get layups at the rim, right? They'll take their chances with Steph, taking contested threes, but they would rather that than give Draymond a 4-on-3 where he's always making the right decision. Teams will do that, and one of the things I think that the Lakers are going to see for sure if they make it to the playoffs, they're seeing it in the regular season already, is teams are absolutely fully committing to just taking away the rim. Like they will play shell zone from the start tip all the way until the buzzer rings at the very end. And they will dare the Lakers to make as many jump shots as they can. It doesn't always work because the players don't necessarily always execute the scheme. So you'll see games where Russ is getting shots at the rim, LeBron's getting shots at the rim, or Anthony Davis is dominating his matchup or whatever it is. But for the most part in the playoffs, that's what's going to happen. And getting these sort of high Q2 players that allow you to, these high Q shooters that allow you to play them in different lineup combinations. So you can play that high Q2 with like Russ, that player, LeBron, AD, and a floor spacing 5 in the starting lineup. But if you have to go small and LeBron and AD have to go to the 4 and the 5, well, now you can insert in Austin Reeves at the 2, and that player maybe slides down to the 3, depending on who the matchup is, or he stays at the 2 and Stanley Johnson joins the floor because maybe the 3 that the opposing team has is a more physical bruising type of 3, or they have a player on the floor that's just a wing that is more of a power wing, so you need somebody with a high strength profile. So Stanley has to play. So giving Darvin Ham those different opportunities is important. But the constants, right? There are certain role players that should be considered more important or more elevated. So when we think of 3-and-D players, everybody's going to want that player. 3-and-D wings, every single team that has championship ambitions is going to be trying to get a 3-and-D wing player, somebody that's 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", potentially. So, but that specific player is one tier down. The Lakers need to hit on these very specific role players, the heavy big, the mobile big, the high Q2, and if they hit on those 3, then now you have a core functioning. Let's say Russ is on this roster. You have 6, 7 guys that will fit within any one of those, like any of the schemes that Darvin Ham wants to run. And then now you're just inserting in the correct 3-and-D guy or the correct scoring guard, whatever it is. It makes it easier to fill a roster. But you have to try and get to that 6 or 7 guys who are like the core interchangeable guys that you can do within the group and stuff like that. So I think guys like, Bogdanovic, guys like Fournier, guys like Gary Trent. I don't know how tall Gary Trent is. He may be, let's see here, Trent. he may actually. I don't even think he's available, but like he's another guy. Oh, he's 6'5". Okay, so he's another guy that sort of falls in these 6'5", 6'6", 6'7" guys. Like they're all the best guys to sort of have in these sort of roles and positions. And it may not necessarily be somebody that costs you 19 million. Like maybe if we go down the list and we're looking around, a guy like Terrence Ross may be available. Like maybe he is somebody who the Lakers can go and try and reach out to. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Terrence Ross himself is also 6'5". Let's take a look here. 6'6". Again, and I think, I'm not sure if Terrence Ross is clutch, but again, that's another example of I know Gary Trent is clutch. Like another example of a player that maybe, on the move, or Orlando's just trying to get rid of, so that they can make room for whoever they draft, or because they have a logjam themselves of too many guards. They have Suggs, they have Cole Anthony, they have Markelle Fultz. They may not know what direction that they want to go in and stuff like that. And so when we think of high Q2 shooters, that's what we're thinking of. Those are the kinds of guys that we're trying to target. And I think the two qualities, obviously defense always matters. So that having a standard motor on defense is important. But you want that player to be 6'5", 6'6". And you want it to be somebody who can transition from being a catch and shoot player for stretches of the game to being a player whose number gets called on for stretches of the game. And health matters, availability matters. But I think if the Lakers can land somebody like that, and they can sort of scratch or check off the box of that player, it'll make it easier to fit in wings and fit in the type of 3-and-D wings that we need. That'll give us the health and the hustle and the effort that we need. The Wenyen Gabriels, the Stanley Johnsons. It makes it easier to play those guys because we don't want to rely on those guys to be scorers. We want to rely on those guys to do the hustle stuff. So that's why you need to try and get a high Q2 shooter and stuff like that. So these were just sort of the examples of a few players that I sort of thought of that are attainable via trade, depending on what their situation and stuff may be. But it really just kind of comes down to the direction that the Lakers go in, how they feel about Taylor, how they feel about Kendrick Nunn, whether Russ is the guy who gets traded or not. All these guys can, if Russ gets traded to a third team, all these guys can be traded back. But it all just depends on availability. So what you really want is the front office to, you want Rob and them to sort of do their due diligence and work really hard in making sure that they explore every avenue. And, if we do decide, and the reason why I picked Taylor and Kendrick was specifically because, I just don't know. It's just the easiest way to make it happen. It would also open, if they do a 2-for-1, maybe the savings could result in the Lakers getting a second round pick in return. So maybe if the Lakers send Taylor and Nunn to Atlanta for Bogdanovic because Atlanta really wants to get out of his last year, maybe they send us their second round pick or something like that. And now the Lakers have a second round pick for the Buss brothers to try and, find some gold yet again, some diamond in the rough in the second round. If that second round pick is like in the 40s or something like that. And they don't have to spend, and then they can spend additional money to buy even more second round picks if they want, whatever it may be. So it's just that this role is really important. I think if they can land a player that's in this role, and I think this player would fit really well in Darvin Ham's philosophy, and I think the Lakers should be successful. I think a guy like LeBron really appreciates that type of player, and we've seen with how much he likes Austin Reeves, like those kind of guys matter, and those kind of guys add minutes to LeBron's legs, and they make his life easier too as well. Even with LeBron kind of transitioning to a more jump shooting, less rim attacking mode because he doesn't get calls, like he's still going to do it if he knows that the guy that's going to shoot the ball is going to be a quality player. And if nothing else, when LeBron goes to the bench, it allows the Lakers to not have a huge drop off in scoring, because that's always been like one of the biggest issues since LeBron has been here. When LeBron leaves, even the facilitation isn't as much of an issue. The issue is there isn't a consistent flow of scoring, and some of that has to do with Anthony Davis's just the wear and tear on Anthony Davis. You know how much he's playing defense, and then whether he has energy for offense when LeBron leaves and stuff like that. Just kind of how all that stuff works. So, hopefully this has been helpful. I hope you guys enjoyed. I apologize for the drinking water and the coughing and stuff like that. I'm still working on getting over the COVID stuff, but I should be there sooner than later. But this was fun. Hopefully this with now as sort of the companion, and again, as always, I'll have something in the newsletter for the written companion. But when we combine this, and then you think about the high motor bigs that we need to add, you could start kind of thinking in your mind how this is going to work out and what the Lakers can do to try and make this a successful run in Darvin Ham's first year as a coach, and how we can kind of get back to contention and stuff like that. So as always, if you can like and subscribe, I appreciate it. And for all the folks that already have, I continue to appreciate you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video.